On March 16th, 2009, 16 years ago, what started as a tourist trip of several days in Mexico turned out to be an extremely life-altering event for the lives of many people, myself included. We were traveling in Mexico and taking the road towards the south. This was the very first day of a about 7-day trip of what would be my last trip of this particular tourist season. Back then, I used to work as a tour guide. I was about 20 years old, and my job was basically being there and taking care of translation for tourists that were traveling by road in Mexico, which is a type of business that does not exist anymore. The bus that we were in had two different drivers, Cesar and Gabriel, and these buses can take about 42 people in a trip, but this trip in particular was a smaller trip. We were about half a bus, but still we went on the journey. After crossing from the USA into Mexico very early in the morning and arriving to the city of Saltillo in the state of Coahuila, we had lunch. And after this, we had about a 4-hour drive towards going south in Mexico. And after having lunch and beginning our journey back, you see this this type of operation. The two drivers that we had are supposed to take turns and cover for one another. We have Cesar on the wheel and Gabriel, who was to cover for him later. After lunch, normally the protocol was that Javier could go into the cabin that exists in the under part of the bus and sleep until 4 hours later or so, 2 hours later or so, and then he would cover for Cesar. But for whatever reason, after we had lunch, I remember he said he didn't feel like going underneath the bus. This decision would be very, very important for him later on. When you travel from Saltillo to the south towards, let's say, Aguascalientes, this is a big road, and you cross the desert in a 2-lane highway that is only 1 lane for cars going in one direction, the other lane for cars going in the opposite direction. As you are leaving Saltillo, there's still quite a few hills. So the road back then, I don't know how it is now, it's been 16 years, but the road back then had a lot of curves leaving Saltillo. But after, let's say, 40 minutes of curves or so, maybe more, then you have a straight line. So what happens when you're driving in this type of road is that when you are in the curves, it is very hard to go ahead of anyone, especially if you have a big car, a big truck, or a big bus like us. It'll be very hard to go past them because you're in a curve, and if you wait a little bit and you go into the straight line, then it becomes quite easy to go around people. we were meant to drive for about 4 hours, and my job at that moment was entertaining the passengers. I remember I would always tell them a few jokes about there not being that many interesting things to see in the desert. Of course, there are many interesting things to see, but I would joke around about it. Because after lunch, you're going to the bus, you know you're going to go to the desert. It's a lot of seeing the same thing over and over again, the same type of trees, the same type of everything. So usually passengers want to take a little break, a little nap. And after my little speech about it, I just let the mic go and let people take a nap, watch a movie, whatever it is that they want. Before I finished my conversation to the passengers that time, I remember noticing that Cesar, our driver at the time, he was uncomfortable. And I've driven with Cesar a few times in the past, and with Gabriel a little bit as well. And we had good chemistry, good communication. And it turned out that Cesar was uncomfortable because there was another person on the road driving quite carelessly. This individual wanted to get past cars constantly. They were behind us and they would peek out every now and then, and Cesar would see them and he would just cringe. He would feel uncomfortable about how risky his maneuvers were in the middle of driving fast, 80 kilometers per hour, a lot of curves. It was very uncomfortable. And then I remember I finished my conversation with the passengers, and soon after I saw this white Tsuru car with I think only one individual, I'm pretty sure, finally went ahead of us. And then still, at this point we arrived at the straight line, and he continued to want to go further ahead. He wanted to continue going onwards. Now he was trying to overtake like a pickup truck. So again, he was peeking, making sure that no car was coming from the opposite direction, trying to get his chance to do it. And for us, it doesn't make sense. We know the road well enough that if you wait 2 minutes, you'll be clear and you'll be able to do it. And everyone who needs to go fast, they'll be able to go around you, go fast, and all the heavy trucks, cargo, semi-trailers, all of them will stay in their own rhythm. That's how it works. We didn't know this at the time, but it had been raining in the past few nights, and they had already started digging around this road to expand on it, to add more lanes. So they had been digging on the sides of it, and then whatever signs there were warning you that the road was high and that it had been raining and that water had been flowing, creating a dip or a depth of sorts. Apparently all the signs had been washed away by the rain and the flowing water. When you're driving at probably even just 40 or more kilometers per hour, and you look outside the window, even if there's an altitude, you can see the edge of the road, but it would be hard to see that you are at a distance from the actual floor of the desert. The person in the white car eventually saw what they thought to be a chance to continue going forward. This was not a good chance, because from the opposite direction, at maybe 80 to 90 kilometers per hour, a 22-year-old driver of a semi-trailer company was coming from the opposite direction, and he was coming quite fast. And the way this driver from the white Tsuru wanted to go forward, it didn't make sense. It was too risky, and he was not going to have enough time to go beyond. So as a precaution, the natural thing to do, and this is very important in my eyes, the person coming from the opposite direction, he made space for him. Despite the risky maneuver. I find that to be important. I find it to be important because there are things that we do in consideration of other people, and there are also automatic reactions that we have as humans. And I believe that we as human beings are creatures that are fundamentally benevolent, and that our instincts are as primitive as we might regard them to be. They are still framed to a fundamental benevolent nature. And I'm a very optimistic person, perhaps a bit romantic, but I think when someone doesn't show that benevolent nature a lot, then I just think something happened along the way. I say this because when the semi-trailer driver did that, you see the road is at a height. So you could see it quite well from the distance that his trailer started leaning to the side. He was alone. I feel that if you were in his shoes, and after doing that act of giving space for someone, you notice that your whole vehicle is turning sideways, and in that instant your brain quickly understands, I am at a height, I am losing my balance. The automatic human response is to do the opposite thing, and to steer the wheel back into the road. So of course they do that, the other driver just went ahead, and what unfolded next is taking place probably in 5 seconds, but to me it felt like a long situation. This is the first time in my life that I experienced in the flesh. You see, you might have heard that the human eye does not perceive like a film. We think that we perceive like a film, but really we are perceiving many images, one after the other, like old cartoons, old movies. Is not a continuous thing. That's what it felt like, and that's how time was perceived by me at the time. From that moment, perhaps the adrenaline or the understanding of my brain kicked in such a way that the next few seconds, the next few frames per second, frames or pictures taking place in front of me were happening as if I was watching a slideshow, image for a while, next image for a while, next image for a while. I saw the semi-truck going back into the road and then slightly bouncing from one side to the other until it eventually stabilized, and at that moment, however, it was close enough to us that it might be from any particular distance from here to crossing the street. So not very far. And it was positioned in such a way that it was facing completely ahead of us. It was facing completely in front of us. And it's hard to describe. You hear people talk about their experiences, I guess, and we do say it all happened in an instant, and it's such a complicated instant at the same time. I'll say next from first person, the physical parts that took place. Then I'll open more to talk about the other individuals who were there. And then I'll talk more about the internal, mental, emotional experience that unfolded for context, because that is the whole point of this. So forgive me just choosing this order. It feels like the best way to frame it because it's a complicated series of events. As the trailer was moving towards us, again, it just looked like it was here, and then after a few minutes it was here, and then after a few minutes it was here. I remember Cesar, our driver, in just a frame, in just one of these several frames, it took him just one, to steer the wheel to the right as much as he could. As the last action of this man's life. That was the last action of his life. I remember Gabriel in some way turning, twisting his body in some type of preparation. And I remember there's this instinct or impetus to move your body. And my instinct was to cover myself and cross my arms. And it was so frustrating that you couldn't do it. It's frame by frame. It's a very peculiar experience to be in. I wanted to say a curse word in Spanish. Back then, I spoke with a lot more curse words than I do now. The full word didn't even leave my lips. There was no time. It was very astonishing to me how the windshield glass was breaking. It started from the bottom, and you could see it breaking and branching. It was around the time where it just finished breaking that I suppose I closed my eyes. And if you've ever been to the ocean, especially as a child, you go to the ocean and you find a wave that's too strong, and then it just scrambles you. Te da una revolcada, don't know the word in English. You feel very powerless. The ocean is so strong that it just kind of moves you around and it pushes you all the way to the beach, to the shore, and you're full of sand, and it feels terrible. But, you know, it can lead to nothing, right? It can be a very meaningless thing. This is exactly how it felt. I felt like I was completely at the whim of physics, and I remember hearing the crash, the break, the metal, the impacts, and getting impacted myself from all directions. To me, it felt that after the impact took place, my body sank. Perhaps it's important to mention that this bus, like most big buses or bus doors, when you open the door to it, of course it's the American design, not the European design. They open the door, you see stairs that lead towards the driver, and then stairs to the left that lead to the passenger seats. And in that dashboard in front of the driver, that's where the microphone was in, right? And that's the microphone I would take and speak to the people. So I want to just point out for reference that the driver, Cesar, was here. I was in the middle, a little bit higher. I was squatting on the stairs that lead towards the passengers who were all behind me. And then Gabriel is standing in the other steps near the door. There's another seat there that you can enable. So I felt my body coming down. Gabriel turning towards me. Cesar turning the wheel. I remember the sounds. I remember no voices. I remember the impacts like I was being taken away by the ocean until one final impact hit me in the back so strong that all the air came out of my lungs. And it opened my eyes. And this is where the instincts of human nature kick in. I don't really understand a lot of what happened next. When I opened my eyes, I remember on the right side seeing light, and immediately I felt, or I knew, that I needed to crawl out from where I was, that hole. I never lost consciousness at this moment. I guess in the movies, people always lose consciousness, and to be fair, when I've been reflecting on it over the last few days, there is at least some subtle desire when we go through these things to lose consciousness. I wish I had lost consciousness. I remember that thought, that feeling, because you don't want to deal with it. You don't want to be there, but you're there. You're not losing consciousness. But at any rate, I saw the light and I somehow crawled out. I don't understand how. The reason why I say I don't understand, even recently, I remember at the time I saw the condition of the bus. And recently I saw the pictures of the wreckage. And I'm not sure yet, as I'm recording this video, if I'll show any pictures or how descriptive I can be. But perhaps it is to be understood that only 30% of the bus remained there, and of course not intact. 30% of the bus remained in some shape that resembled the bus. The rest of it disappeared from existence. The pieces that were spread out in the desert, you could build a bus from it, if that makes sense. And of course, when we had this impact and we turned towards the right side, we flew out and we landed in the desert. That dip, right? That height. So there was a distance that I guess the bus slid through, and the hole underneath of the bus disappeared completely, and the entirety of the left side. Only a portion of the right upper side passenger area of the bus remained in existence. This is why I know that whatever Gabriel was thinking or feeling after lunch in Saltillo, we had lunch at this random food court out of a supermarket. And it was odd. It was odd the way, it was particular the way he said, I don't want to go under. And whatever caused that decision saved his life. Cesar was not unlucky. Cesar's action to take us out of the road is, to me, what saved the life of each and every single person who survived. He died instantly, with his hands still on the wheel. I will discover that a bit later. To me, that goes beyond the instinct of survival and protection. To me, that man saved as much as it could have been saved. Because there were people who were saved miraculously. So, moving back a bit, I pull myself out from under the wreckage. Still, I don't know how. There's no way out from there. I don't know how I pulled myself out. But I do remember I saw the light and I pulled myself out. I crawled out in some manic way. I imagine I was adrenaline driven, right? I felt no pain. And I pulled myself out of there so strongly that when I pushed myself finally out of it and I could see the light, I could see the sun, my body was running. That's how strong I pushed up. I felt my legs, even though I didn't feel the pain and the adrenaline, I felt my legs were okay. And I looked down at my legs and I was wearing jeans and my jeans looked, my legs looked okay, I guess. My phone was still in my pocket. An instant later, I started hearing voices, people. And I turn around towards the bus and I see the reality. And I think that what I saw then is too graphic to say. I believe it's too graphic to say. I try to help people. But my upper body was hurt. And I remember trying to turn people, trying to help people. I didn't know at the time. I had some injuries, minor injuries. I say minor because when you look at this and you realize where I was in that bus and how this bus was taken apart, it is a miracle to me that I am alive. So my clavicle was broken. I had like glass all over me, all these things, but nothing immediately life-threatening. When I realized I couldn't help people, my next thought was, I gotta go to the road and stop cars and ask for help. I didn't need to stop the cars because the trailer that had hit us had remained on the road. We were completely out of the road. The trailer was still on the road and completely blocked it, so everyone going in either direction, they couldn't move forward. I ran towards the road. I didn't know it at the time, but I was covered in blood. I didn't feel it. I felt, I guess, some type of pain because I tried to move things and people, and it's weird. It's like it's an experience of pain, but not pain. I don't know how to describe it. It's not important. One of the first cars, if not the first car that stopped, was a freshly married couple of doctors. Heaven sent. I remember their faces. They looked at me. I was running. I ran towards the road. I think I was trying to wave my arms. I don't know if I was actually doing it. Asking for help. I don't know if I even had voice, but I remember the faces. They looked at me like shock. They came down and we approached the bus, and of course these are mostly Americans and Canadians in the bus. And I remember they were telling me things, and I was shouting instructions to the bus because there were people still inside the bus. There were people scattered everywhere, and just trying to shout instructions to people. If you can't move, stay still, or if you can't move, stuff like that. We had like a cooler full of sodas and waters, and that helped also at some point. We are very lucky. I want to point out that we're in the middle of a desert, and the next town ahead of us is at least an hour and a half away, and the city behind us is also an hour and a half away. There's no cell phone reception. At least back then, the cell phones that we had back then, and I don't know, there's no signal, there's no reception. Luckily, there was a road patrol officer, federal officer, who was just passing by and saw all the cars stopping by and of course approached and find out what's going on. This happened just a few minutes after, and to me that's also heaven sent, because otherwise it would have taken at least 1 hour and a half for somebody to contact authorities in one town and then get the ambulances and all of this to come and start helping out. But that time was cut in half thanks to the officer going there. When he arrived, he again gave me some instructions to tell to people. I don't really remember many of these instructions. Around that time, I remember Gabriel had been taken out. He had his head wrapped in a jacket. His head was really hurt. He was really scared. He was really worried. But he was supportive, and I'll never forget that. His demeanor was very, very comforting, very supportive. I don't know how many accidents he has seen. He's been a driver all of his life. Maybe he's seen a few. It's my first accident like that. Well, around this time, we also got told that Cesar didn't make it. This is the first day of the 7-day trip, so I'm not yet that familiar with the other passengers. I didn't know them by name. I had just known them for a couple of hours. But Gabriela and Cesar I've known for a few weeks, months. When it was no longer necessary for me to give instructions and all these things, they started checking me out to see what my condition was. And again, it didn't look like I had anything life-threatening. I remember they leaned me in the edge of the road, and that's when I realized how tall it was, because my hips were lower, so at least a meter more. I suppose at that time the adrenaline starts running off and you're to some degree calming down, but there's no calm. It's not calm, it's just a stillness. There's a lot of restlessness going on, and they leaned Javier right next to me. We're just leaning there. And before I could think of anything else, I remember again feeling like something's happening. I felt like I was sinking. My back started to hurt. My whole body started to hurt. I had a lot of back problems. And of course, you think, oh, something's happening. Actually, I remember at the time I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to die, and again, time slowed down for me. I had Gabriel right next to me. I tried to turn and say, Gabriel, help me. Gabriel, help me. But again, my body wasn't responding. I felt like I was sinking. And physically, the next thing I remember was coming back. They had to use my own backpack. I don't even know how to use my own backpack, but maybe it's just a coincidence. As a pillow, I was lying on the road. They were splashing water on me. And I was back. It is important to me to mention that I was very frightened. I thought I was going to die. And I felt a lot of fear of that unknown. I'll talk about that in a moment, because the point of this today has been today it's been 16 days, 16 years. And there's a point to this that I'll get to, but those who know me have things aren't simple with me. The life that I've been given is a complex life. I may jokingly say I have lived a long life, and it's a bit of a joke, but it's also reality. I've lived a long life. By my mid-20s probably, and of course now by my mid-30s, I probably would warrant that I've lived what many people live in 2 lifetimes worth of experiences, good and bad. But I'll get to the point in a moment. I do feel like it's necessary to build some context and tell the whole story, because I feel it very strongly that I have to share this story, and that's what we are doing. I remember at this point I am extremely thirsty, and I'm begging for water. I'm saying, please give me water. They said, no, apparently you can't drink after such an experience. You may have internal damage and you need to wait some time. It's all I could think about. Please give me some water. Because I had my backpack, I dug around my backpack, dug out the camera that I had at the time. I actually still have this camera somewhere at home. I took a picture of my hand because there was a splash of blood in my hand that created a perfect cross. And it became very symbolic to me. I may still have that picture at some hard drive somewhere. Now, as I told you, Gabriel was really worried about his head. Luckily, even though he had glass shards and wounds, nothing penetrated further. The head was well. Well is not the word. Sometimes I struggle with what. Having said that, despite the superficial wounds, the skull, the head is fine. Gabriel apologized later. He said, I took your favorite jacket. We had talked about that jacket, and I said, this is my favorite jacket. He used it to wrap his head. He was very frightened, and he was okay. Gabriel is a religious man. He's a spiritual man. Later on, I thought maybe I can retrieve the jacket and wash it. And he told me soon after, you can't get that jacket back. I already burnt it. These things need to be burnt. That's what he believes in. And I agree. Cesar was not so lucky. This is a family man, and he died instantly. 11 more people died in that accident, and the results of that accident in the next couple of days in the hospital. Ambulances came, even helicopters came, and the rescue operation took place, and they transported me and a couple of other people, and in an ambulance to Saltillo. A few people got transported via helicopter, those who were at no risk. A few of the people who were transported to the hospital didn't make it. So "11 people lost their lives that day, or as a result of that day. These are people who were traveling to see Mexico. It was a 7-day trip. Most of them were retired, older people, snowbirds. That was the job. That was the business. That was my tour guide job. These are people who were out to enjoy life, perhaps at the end of their lives, have a different perspective of their neighbor. So I have a lot of love and a lot of pride for the beauty of my country. And it was always a privilege to be that person in that trip, that tour guide. So now we can get closer to the point of this. Back then, I was 20 years old. I never blamed the driver of the semi. It would be a stretch to say that I blamed the person who was driving carelessly. The word that comes to the mind is responsibility. I wish this person was responsible. I wish we were all more responsible. Because the actions of this person are closely related to the events that took place. The driver, on the other hand, he survived. His trailer was completely obliterated. So when I looked at it before I got taken away in the ambulance, I immediately thought this man died. He didn't die. 22 years old. Recently got that job. And in my opinion, he was never at fault. He got approached by bad lawyers who cut him a bad deal, and he got into a bad attitude about it, but he was never at fault. He was a scapegoat. He became the scapegoat for the situation. Back then, my life was very, very different from what it is today. In Spanish, experiences like this, we say you are born again. I don't know if they say that in other cultures or in English. I was reborn that day. Back then, I suffered from a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. I was very, very unhappy. All I wanted was just to be free. I was not happy with who I was. I was not happy with where I was in my life. I was in extreme suffering. This was my last job of that season. And as my last job, the idea was to wrap this up. And use all the money that I had saved to show myself a good time and then show myself the door. That was the plan. I literally thought, I want to walk into the desert and disappear. Every now and then, I would think, I want to walk into the desert and disappear, except if I come back. I'll come back as a new man, because this is not life. I contemplated a lot of darkness, and I was not proud of who I was. I was not purposeful. I was not motivated. I was completely lost. And I figured I want to leave before I get worse, unhappy, because when you're that unhappy, you make other people unhappy, and that's not who I wanted to be. I figured I'd rather just disappear. I did disappear in that desert. I did go into a desert and I came back as a different person. But To me, when you go through a life-altering event, near-death experience, if you will, if you go through an extreme experience, if you go through something that can be the catalyst of transformation, it does not happen from one day to the other. That is romantic. That is idealist. Is idealist the word I'm thinking of? Illusion. I am an absolutely different person now. But this transformation did not come about the next day. It actually took a long time. It took years, and I find it important to say that it took arduous efforts to undo what I had done with my mind, my attitude, my behavior. Undo what I allowed other people to cast upon me. Undo the self-hatred and hatred to my brethren and hatred to the world that I had allowed to infect my heart. I do not believe authentic, sincere, real, lasting transformation can happen from one day to the other. I have not seen it. I am always ready to be proven wrong, however. I'll say that much. I recovered physically. After a few years, I would still dig pieces of glass from my body, but the body heals. But my mind, my heart, have not yet healed. I felt tremendous, I believe is what they call survivor's guilt. Why? Because I was arrogant, and because I was boasting some perverted version of good person syndrome, where I thought, how dare I live if other people have died? How can I, who hated life, be living if people who were in the process of life enjoying by going on the strip die? I thought I was going through some cruel joke designed in a perverse way. Guilt is like that, but I don't see it that way anymore. I see that's a limited view. It's a very arrogant and limited view of the reality of things. First and foremost, that this is a very complex network of consciousness. It's a play that we are living in which so many pieces are moving, and we think that we can take that as our own and say, this is mine, these are my feelings, this is my experience. In my opinion, it is not like that. I believe something happened that day. I believe I saw God. I believe I saw signs. Gabriel believed it too. I described how when the impact came about, I felt like I was going downwards. Gabriel described that he saw someone coming from above and pulling me up and out the window. All I know is that I don't know what happened. And I doubted that for the longest time. Perhaps I still do. It doesn't matter if I doubt it or don't, or if I accept it, doesn't matter. He saw what he saw, and he's completely convinced of it. And all I can describe is that I was in darkness, I saw a light, and I moved my body in some indescribable way to pull myself out and start screaming for help. I asked myself for the longest of times, why am I here? I asked myself that for years, since I can remember, since childhood, to priests and teachers and parents and family and friends. And even after this, I would ask myself even harder, why am I here? What is the purpose of all this experience? What is the purpose of all this suffering? I was in a lot of pain. And even after I was in a lot of pain, a couple of years went by and I had built some type of life for myself. I had a job, I had the apartment, I had a partner, I had a car, I had friends, I would go out. I was still so terribly unfulfilled. I was completely lost. I would get into this habit of just walking aimlessly for a long time and get lost in some contemplation as I did that. I remember one day I left work and instead of driving back home, I decided to take the metro, and I got off at some random station. I never took the metro. I didn't even know where it went. And I got off at some random station and I just started walking, getting lost in my thoughts until I came back into me in front of a particular building. This particular building was significant to me because I had seen it a lot of times in my childhood. It feels like a bit of a tangent, but again, maybe the context is important. I don't know. But there's a personal reason why ever since childhood, my grandmother, my family would take me in this area of town. I would see that building and I would say to myself, one day I will live in that place. One day that will be my house. That will be my casa. When I came out of that contemplative trance and I'm just standing somewhere in town and I look to the right and I see that building. It's been years since I walked into this part of town and it says casa. On the wall it says actually the word casa, which means house. It had been turned into a yoga studio, one of the first serious yoga studios in the city. And I went in, I asked, I signed up for classes, started doing yoga. I don't mean this next part as me advertising yoga, but I knew from the first class, I could feel it with absolute certainty. This is what I am supposed to do for the rest of my life. This is related, this is a trailer, this is linked to that which I am looking for. I continued on the path. Later on, I think I got very lucky with my teachers. I've had many amazing teachers who guided me. I started meditating, I started going into the culture, into the tradition, into the scripture, into the language, into the fascination of this. But that frame of the Vedas, or if you will, Hinduism, that is not the point. It is the path that took me out of that disoriented state into a state of self-reliance, where I could be, I guess, self-reliant enough that I could orient myself. This is the point. This particular framework is what took me into that sufficient self-knowledge to know what's right and what's left. There are many paths to this, I later understood. It's not exclusive to this. And it is arrogant that I didn't see them before, because they're right there in front of us. And yes, I believe strongly that religion is one of them, philosophy, many other things, but at the end of the day, these are just frameworks, scaffolding for the rebuilding of the self, for the self-maintenance. They are scaffolding, again, for you to remember who you are and see a path or at least a spark or a semblance of the path that then you have to go on a limb and follow, because it's not clear, it's not clear cut. So the point of all of this is the contribution. I continued even after I entered into this path very deeply, even after going to India to study, even after finding a spiritual lineage and path and pursuing it and losing it and finding it again. I would still ask myself, well, what? Why? I would still have all these burning questions. So it was a very gradual process of undoing and rebuilding. It was hard, it was painful, it took a lot of years, a lot of hard work, a lot of discipline, a lot of love, a lot of errors, tears, failure. And one of the main questions that I had deep within me is, why have I been kept here? I understand now that there is some desire to create things. I understand now that there is some intelligence about it. Why is it that when the glass was breaking and I tried to cover my arms, the curse that came out of my mouth, or tried to come out of my mouth, was so full of guilt? Why did I feel so restless from birth? It's so guilty if I had done nothing wrong other than self-hatred. And yes, I hated so many things. I hated the world and everything, but that only came about as a consequence to my own self-hatred, lack of self-appreciation. There was a guilt inside me that, you see, when we don't take care of it, it's very dangerous, because it makes us feel shameful, even of doing the right thing. And next thing we know, we actually start justifying the internal guilt and shame that we feel by externally doing things that match how we feel, because we're not discovering the source of why do we feel like that. The reason why I felt so guilty, this is very important, is the lack of contribution to the consciousness that I am a part of, and the not acceptance of the burning desire for that contribution to be relating to supporting people, which is what I have done, yes, for a long time, and without realizing, is this what I need to do? And I taught therapeutic yoga for a long time, and I would talk hours on end with people, and I would feel this in me of, I have to make this conversation count, and I didn't yet have the tools, and I had to develop and go out and find the tools and the intelligence and the methods to help me understand what is this contribution that I am here for. The reason why I am here is so that I can be of service. The reason why I am here is so that I can be who I am, is so I can take my part in the play and give my contribution to consciousness. My own brand of who I am supposed to be, that is renewed and rediscovered and re-explored on a daily basis, is for me to allow myself to go through the whole human experience with its heights and lows, and just discover who I am in all these different colors. So the purpose or the intention behind this message, I could feel it from a few days before. You know, my mentor, and I felt this too for a long time, my mentor has pushed me and encouraged me to share this. Not just as a cathartic, therapeutic thing, which it is. It's liberating, but also because God would not make you go through something if it's not meant to serve your growth. God would not make you go through something if it does not serve the play. That you are an instrument, it's in something else taking place. Or an instrument in not something else, an instrument in this taking place. The thisness that is taking place. But we get confused and we say, no, I am not the instrument. I am the one who does. That's the arrogance of taking it instead of becoming, instead of being, instead of participating. And it's quite fascinating to let go of that and rediscover that freedom of just being. I know that I am very comfortable with the word God, but I also offer other words for people who aren't as comfortable. I know that God made me go through that as part of the play. And it is perfect. It is too complex to not say that it is perfect. We are here for a contribution. Think about it. There is something that you can do. There is something that you can contribute that only you can do. No one else. And what do you think will happen if you don't do that? Quote unquote nothing? No. Worse than nothing. You will be brought back to do it with an even angrier wake-up call. I did not listen until I was woken up. Even then, I almost fell asleep again. But I admit, and I believe we should all admit, that there is an inner light, an inner guidance that is always there, even when we think we don't have it. Even if we think our parents, our teachers, the systems, the religion, the culture, the spirituality failed us, you still have that there. You can't hide from it. Now, I just said something that relates to what some people call karma. But you don't need to use that word. You just need to understand that it is as simple as this. If you have a responsibility of something you have to do today, and you don't do it, and you leave for tomorrow the responsibility is still there, but you feel more pressure. It's the same dynamic. If you have a purpose, if you have been brought here, it is for a purpose. God is purposeful. Consciousness is intelligent. It is full of wisdom and love. It is benevolent. You are not an accident. What happened to me is not an accident. It is a divine command. It is marching orders. It is wake-up call. It is instructions for those who want to see, for those who want to listen. Like the Christ said. Correction. Like the Christ says. So, I did not plan very much. It was just a very strong pull, a very strong feeling of sharing this. It's been 16 years today that I was brought back, and I've kept myself quite busy, and yet every day I feel like I haven't done enough. And I say that in a positive sense. I don't say that as like I feel defeated, but in a certain sense, I can't wait to show you what I want to do, what I am doing, what's on my mind, what I'm working on, what I've been working on for years and years. It's a long-term plan, it's a long-term investment. So I want to wrap this up with that part of the message. Whoever is doing me the grace of listening to this, you are here for a reason. And I would fight to the death for that. I refuse any debate on that. If there's anything that I refuse to debate in, is that. Except maybe if you yourself refuse to see it, like I was. What will your contribution be? What do you want to give? To give back? What is that burning question inside of you that hungers to be answered? That when you wake up in the morning, when you go to bed at night, it's still there. And that we sometimes bury it with other stuff, trying to avoid it, but it's the one thing that cannot be avoided. And how are you acting towards that purpose that you know you have, and that you cannot lie to me, you cannot lie to yourself, more importantly, that you have that. What are you waiting for? What are you doing that's so important? That could be more important than the most important thing. Your contribution and your purpose is closely related to who you are. Perfectly. What can there possibly be that's more important than that? There's got to be a contribution or a purpose to this moment here, I hope. So if this serves just one person, I'll be happy. If it doesn't serve anyone, I'm also happy. Because that's it. It's not about the result. It's about the action. And on that note, I have no idea why I felt so strongly to share this, but I recorded and I may post it, I may edit it, I may post it, and that's it. So to close, I just want to say act in accordance to your purpose. Do the work that unveils that which you yourself veiled. Do the work of uncovering that beautiful mystery of who you are and what that contribution to consciousness is. Follow the signs that you know in your heart. Point in that ever ever revealed direction. Don't try to lie to yourself. And be happy. I want to thank you for listening to this message, and I wish you the very best.